2009 security megatrend survey we undertook for a couple of reasons. One is when you look at the environment, companies are under increasingly new pressure to really drive efficiency. The economic climate has fundamentally changed. This is forcing every IT department to look at ways to reduce costs. And several of these ways can conceivably introduce new risk and unforeseen risk into the corporate IT landscape. We really wanted to get a handle in 2009 in terms of what megatrends of security risk are starting to emerge as we go into really a new business climate, as well as there's a new technology climate too. We identified 8 key megatrends in the survey in 2009. They were cloud computing, virtualization, outsourcing, cybercrime and cyber threats, data breach, particularly in the area of identity theft, mobility and mobile platforms, peer-to-peer file sharing, and Web 2.0. Based on the 8 megatrends, we asked the 2 functional areas of IT operations and IT security to really look at each trend and identify the key risk and threats associated with that trend. Looking at the 8 trends, particularly in the area of outsourcing, again, outsourcing is being fueled by the economic realities of the day, and more companies are going to be looking at outsourcing as a way to drive operational efficiencies. Outsourcing definitely was recognized as a key risk both across IT operations and IT security professionals. When looking at IT outsourcing, there were really 2 areas of risk that started to emerge. One was the level of security at the third-party partner itself. What processes do they have in place? What technology do they have in place? Are they going to regard your information in the same way as you do? There's also another area of risk just in terms of the data transmission between yourself and your third party. It's no secret that several cyber criminals have also looked at third parties as a way to get into the corporate environment. So as more companies look to outsource, we're going to see new avenues of risk start to emerge in 2009 and beyond. Well, cybercrime and data breaches are very closely linked together. And one thing that the research showed is that 92% of the companies surveyed had been a victim of a cyber attack, which is an astonishingly high number. When you look at the current economic environment, recent research has correlated that as the economy becomes more challenging, that there is going to be a rise in cyber threats. Recently, in the September stock market, it declined about 5.5%, roughly from September 14th through about the 16th. In that same time frame, we saw a 3x growth in malware attacks. So one thing's for sure, we know that cyber activity and cyber threats are going to increase, and that's almost creating this perfect storm. IT budgets are coming under pressure as companies look to reduce costs. Yet the threats to these companies are actually increasing. And when you look at data breach, most people will look at a data breach and say, well, there's a cost associated with that. And I think that the Ponemon Institute had monetized that at roughly $200 a record. And the average cost of a breach in 2008 was $6.3 million. But the monetization or the loss of data is only one part of the loss that companies really need to be aware of. It's the loss and risk to the brand equity, which to me, in my view, is the much greater loss. Mobile workforce and mobility in general will continue to pose a significant risk to the corporate IT landscape. And this is in part due to a couple of key areas. One is that the mobility platforms themselves are becoming more powerful. Storage is increasing, computing power is growing, and you even look at the bandwidth in which these mobile devices have access to, it's 3 times higher than what it ever has been prior. And so these mobility platforms are actually becoming a platform in the sense that people can access new types of applications, new types of services, and again, this becomes another entry point into the corporate IT landscape. And the reality is that companies are going to be looking to leverage these mobile platforms in a way to really boost productivity across their employee base. Cloud computing is interesting to me in the sense that it's been talked about for quite some time, but I think that cloud computing is now becoming a reality across the corporate landscape. And part of this is due to the economic climate that we find ourselves in. So there are new questions that are going to be asked. How is my data being protected? Who's accessing my information and from where? And when you look at P2P file sharing and Web 2.0, the reality is that as little as 5 years ago, the tools that we use to collaborate and help our productivity have fundamentally changed. If you walk out into your employee workspace, you're going to see people using Facebook, using Twitter, on social communities, blogging, downloading widgets, downloading gadgets. The corporate browser has become a wide open window from the outside in to the corporate landscape, and multitudes of new applications are being introduced every day into the corporate endpoint. And while I don't see companies being able to stop the use of these new tools because they are what's being used to help drive the productivity, we do have to begin to understand the risk and take measures to combat that risk. I think that as the economic environment continues to force companies to look at ways to reduce costs across their IT landscape, virtualization will definitely rise in its risk profile. Understanding the risk associated with virtualization and cloud computing are going to be important for companies to understand moving forward in 2009 and 2010, because you really want to understand how is that information being protected, who is accessing it, where are they accessing it, and can you manage the propagation of potential malware or viruses in your IT landscape. The survey revealed that the two functional areas of IT operations and IT security are actually coming together in their view of the trends of risk that are emerging across the corporate landscape. So the good news is that both functional areas are at least looking at the same playbook. The challenging area is that there's a different perception in the level and severity of each of these trends across the two functional areas. For example, IT security professionals view cybercrime and data breaches as the #1 risk. I think looking at the survey data, roughly 66% of IT security professionals viewed cybercrime as the #1 threat, whereas only 43% of IT operations professionals viewed it at that same level. So this is good insight for a company to understand, because in order for a company to optimize its security investment, we're going to have to look at these functional areas in a much more holistic way if we're really going to bring the processes and the policies together and ultimately optimize our operational security so that we can manage our critical risk and protect our vital information.